All right, let's talk about those lists. You know the ones. Prehistoric monsters you're glad are extinct. Titanoboa? It's always right up there at the top, isn't it? It's become this total pop culture icon, a snake so big it feels like something out of a myth. But here's the thing. That legendary status, it kind of hides the real animal, the creature that science, not legend, brought to light. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to peel back that myth and get to the incredible, true story of the biggest snake that ever slithered on this planet.
And that really is the central question here, isn't it? I mean, how do you even get from a handful of fossilized bones dug up in a Colombian coal mine to this creature that completely captures our imagination? What does the science actually tell us about how big it was, the world it lived in, and what its life was like? Okay, let's get into it. So here's the game plan. First, we're gonna tackle the myth of the monster snake. Then we'll get into the actual discovery of this giant. After that, we'll break down the anatomy of a true titan and explore the hot, humid world it lived in. We'll even look at the scientific debates that popped up. And finally, we'll wrap up with its wild journey from bones to robots. Let's go.
Okay, first things first. In our collective imagination, Titanoboa is basically a monster, right? It gets hyped up, you see it in documentaries fighting a T-Rex, which is fun, but, completely impossible. They were separated by millions of years. So, to really get a grip on the actual animal, we have to start with one basic, super important concept that pretty much ruled its entire life. So, the word you need to know is picholotherm. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but it's way more accurate than cold-blooded. I mean, think about it. If a lizard is sunbathing, its blood is actually pretty warm, right? All this word means is that its body temperature is basically controlled by its surroundings. It can't make its own heat like you and I can. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding Titanoboa. Why? Because for an animal like this, its size and the climate it lives in are completely, totally linked. It's like they're locked in this deep evolutionary dance. All right. Enough about the myth. Let's get to the science. We're jumping from legend to the actual moment this creature was literally pulled out of the ground and finally given a name. And what's wild is that this isn't some old-timey discovery from a century ago. Nope, this is a super recent find that just completely rewrote the rulebook on how big a reptile could possibly get.
Yeah, this timeline really helps put it all in perspective. So the snake itself, it lived way back in the Paleocene, about 5 million years after the dinosaurs checked out. But here's the amazing part. We've only known about it for a hot minute. This isn't some dusty 19th century find. The main scientific paper that announced its discovery was published in 2009. 2009, with big updates just a few years later. We're literally living in the golden age of discovering Titanoboa. Okay, so here are the hard facts, the real nitty-gritty. The discovery happened in Colombia, at the Cerrejón coal mine. And what they found, well, it wasn't a perfect, complete skeleton. It was mostly vertebrae, the bones that make up the spine. But these things were massive, the biggest ever found. And get this, they came from at least 28 different snakes. That number, 28, is so important because it proves they weren't just looking at some one-off genetic freak. This was a whole population of giants. So the name they gave it just fit perfectly. Titanoboa cerrejonensis, the Titanic boa from Cerrejón. So that's the million-dollar question, right? How in the world do you go from a box of backbones to a super detailed picture of a monster snake? Well, it's basically a brilliant piece of detective work. It's all about comparative anatomy, using the blueprints of snakes that are alive today to reconstruct this extinct titan.
Okay, just look at the sheer scale here. It's mind-blowing. Our biggest snakes today, the reticulated python, which is the longest, and the green anaconda, the heaviest, they look like little guys next to this thing. I mean, an anaconda might get up to around 200 kilos. Titanoboa was more than 5 times heavier than that. It's not just a bigger snake. It is in a completely different league. Let's just pause for a second on that number. 1,135 kilograms. That's well over a ton. We're talking heavier than a polar bear, heavier than a massive saltwater crocodile. And the way they figured this out was by comparing the size of Titanoboa's vertebrae to a modern boa constrictor and then just scaling everything up. The result was this absolutely staggering number. There was no question about it. This was the biggest snake science had ever seen. And this is such a great example of how science is always evolving. It's not just one and done. A few years after that first big discovery, researchers found pieces of the skull. And this was a total game changer. First, by looking at the ratio of head to body size in modern anacondas, they actually had to bump its estimated length up to over 14 meters. But even cooler than that, the skull's unique shape told them it was probably a specialized fish eater. That's huge. It made it completely unique among all boas we know of, living or extinct. Okay, so this incredible size, it leads us right to the next big piece of the puzzle. What kind of world did this thing live in? Because, let's be clear, an animal this huge with its massive metabolism, it just couldn't survive on Earth today. No way. Its very existence is like a giant clue, a biological message from the past about a totally different climate. Hey, remember that weird word, poikilotherm? Well, this is where it all comes together. The scientists did the math, and they figured that for a snake this massive to just live, hunt, digest its food, make more giant snakes, the average temperature all year round had to be insanely high. We're talking somewhere between 28 and 34 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, the snake wasn't just a fossil, it was a living thermometer from the past, a paleothermometer. It was hard evidence that the tropics back then were way, way hotter than they are today, probably because the atmosphere was loaded with greenhouse gases. But in science, when you make a huge claim like that, you'd better believe other scientists are going to come check your work. That 2009 paper wasn't the final word. Oh no, it was just the beginning of a big conversation. This whole idea of using one giant snake to take the temperature of an entire ancient world, well, it kicked off a really fascinating and important debate. And honestly, it shows the scientific process working exactly like it should. And this was the heart of it all. The big question was, can you really use this one animal, this one gigantic outlier, to make a definitive call on the climate of a whole ecosystem 60 million years ago? Other scientists were like, let's double check that. So a few challenges popped up in other scientific papers. A researcher named Snyderman said, hey, if you use this same size to temperature model on monitor lizards, the math doesn't add up. Another team, led by Makarieva, basically said, we like your method, but we reran the numbers and think the temperature was a bit lower. And then a third group, led by Denny, brought up this super interesting point. Maybe the problem for a creature that huge wasn't staying warm, but shedding heat. With that much bulk, it might have actually been in danger of overheating. And this is the really cool part. The scientists who wrote the original paper didn't just get defensive and ignore everyone. Nope. They listened. They defended their work, sure, but they also admitted that some of the other points were valid. So they revised their temperature estimate just a little bit, down to a range of 28 to 31 degrees Celsius. And that's not a failure. That's a total win. That whole back and forth is exactly how science is supposed to work. It's all about debate and tweaking things until we get closer and closer to the truth. And that brings us to the final chapter in the Titanoboa story. And believe me, this is maybe the most surprising part of all. This is where a 60-million-year-old animal gets brought back to life, not in some secret lab with DNA, but in an engineering workshop. And for a reason you would never, ever guess. So back in 2011, this team of artists and engineers decided to do something completely wild. They set out to build a full-scale, working, 15-meter-long robotic version of Titanoboa. It was this incredible piece of electromechanical engineering that could actually slither and move, trying to mimic how the real thing might have. But here's the twist. This thing wasn't built for a Hollywood movie or a theme park ride. Its mission was 100% educational. The whole point was to use this giant, spectacular machine to get people talking about energy use, about our carbon footprint, and about the very real threat of climate change today. It was meant to be this unforgettable, in-your-face lesson about our planet. And when you think about it, there's this really powerful, almost poetic irony here. The real Titanoboa was an animal that could only exist because of a super hot greenhouse world. And it probably died out when that climate eventually changed and got cooler. It's a perfect symbol of how life is just welded to climate. And now its robotic twin has been built for the complete opposite reason. To warn us, a totally different species, about the dangers of creating another super greenhouse world all over again. So, we kind of end up right back where we started, but now we know so much more. Titanoboa was a real animal, for sure, a product of its very specific time and its very specific climate. But it's also become this monster in our movies and books, and now it's also this powerful icon for climate change. So the question I'll leave you with is this. What is Titanoboa to us now? Is it an animal, a monster, or a warning? And which of those ideas will be its true legacy?